Thank you for tuning in to the live call-in show, Energy Reading with Lori Grant. You have to feel to heal. Join our live call-in show via our live video stream or the phone number provided. Lori Grant is so much more than a wife, daughter, sister, and friend. She knows that her journey has a reason, and she embraces it all. Lori is a professionally trained life, energy coach, energy medicine practitioner, children's book author, and lover of life. If you have trouble saying no, that probably is me, feel guilty when you do, me so much, or think it's your job or responsibility to fix everything or everyone, I think Lori is talking directly to me. You want to work with Lori. She lives in Littleton, Massachusetts with her husband Andy and their dog Sadie and cat Marge. Lori loves to cook and travel and be with friends and family. Her biggest passions next to living happily with Andy. You can find out more information about Lori at www.lorigrant.com and follow her on Twitter at Energy Coach Lori or on her Facebook page at Leg Up Healing. Lori, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Pete. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. So we're going to have a really, really cool show today. We've already got some callers that have come into the queue. If anybody's in the queue and when we get to the question part, you should have the option of raising your hand. So Lori, what are we going to talk about today? We've talked about possibly talking about the holidays and how to deal with that, haven't we?
Yes, and that's what I wanted to touch on because I'm sure as the holidays come up and get closer, and we just went through Thanksgiving, family is usually a big trigger for the majority of people. There's a line out there in the energy world that says, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a weekend with your parents. So, and you can say that about your siblings as well, right? So that's what we want to talk about today, the spin and of course if you want an energy reading on a different topic, that's certainly fine. But the spin that we end up with when we have the whole conversation in our head with somebody, but we haven't seen them, and then when we actually see them, we're kind of mad at them, but we haven't even talked to them because we've had it all going in our head. So, I know if I say this, they'll say that. And if I say this, they'll say that. And they're not going to like the outfit I'm wearing because they always have a comment about what I'm doing. They don't like my hair. They don't like my glass, whatever it is, right? They're always going to say something. And how am I going to respond? They're just so stupid, right? And then you actually see them and they're nice and you're like, oh, but that's not how I planned it. Right? So we build it up. Or you built it up so much that you're actually the one that's nasty to them. Right. And they haven't said anything yet.
Right.
And you go in with a chip on your shoulder already, and they haven't done anything. Does that sound familiar to anyone?
It does to me, because it's like we set up this whole play, you know what I mean, and everybody's given the script, at least according to us.
Right.
And we're going to follow it no matter what, aren't we?
Yeah, we will try. We'll go out of our way to make it, and then we'll be the ones that are irate going, I knew it would happen like that.
Right.
Like, how many times have you done that? Like, I knew they'd end up doing that.
And when you hear people say that, you almost hear this triumphant kind of thing. Like yes, everybody went by the script.
Right.
The school play went as planned, even though nobody wanted to be in it.
Right. I knew it. Right. It's like, it's so funny, but it's so scary because we realize in that moment how we don't give anybody else a chance to shift or grow. They have to be in the same place that we have them in our head. So if we've done work, right? So if we've done growth work and self-development work, and we've shifted, we can be in this place where they're not going to accept us. They're going to, we still look at them like they haven't done any work. And we make this big assumption that they're not going to accept us the way we are. And we never give them the chance that maybe they shifted.
Right.
And that's how we treat them. So what happens is we treat them like they haven't shifted, and guess what happens? They don't shift, right? You don't give them the chance. We don't give them the opportunity, because we go in a term I use is what we go in defense already. We don't go in our core. We don't go in with who we really are. We go in with an assumption of who they are, and we base our actions on that assumption. Instead of going in open to, I wonder what they'll be like this time.
Right.
Like, imagine if every time you got together with your family, people that you've known for your whole life, obviously, right? They're your family. And you thought, I wonder what they'll be like this time.
Mm. Mm.
Instead of, I know they'll be like, bum, 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 bum.
Right. Right.
So I like I wonder what they'll be like. Like, what if they had an aha since you saw them last?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, we just don't know that.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like we're trying to pick up from the last spot that everybody was at, not really knowing that we're all on this energetic journey and we're all coming in as different people.
Right. Each time we see somebody. Even like I talk to you fairly often, right? And so what if I make the assumption that every time I talk to you, you're different?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like, then we're curious about the person. Like, what's been going on?
Yeah.
What's happening?
But do you think it's people's ego structure where we really kind of not only assume but require people to be the same as they were before because that's part of our ego structure? Or what do you think that is?
It's part of our story. So we could call it the ego structure. I call it part of our story because we don't know how to be different especially with family, right? We don't know how to be different with them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if you're the baby of the family and you've always been treated that way, but you don't really like it and you want to shift and you start to behave differently, it's going to be difficult for them, but it's doable. But as soon as they say something, it triggers you right back into your old patterns. So instead of like not being like the baby of the family, you drop right back into it and then you're mad at them. But it's really our responsibility, right? Like if we don't want to be treated the same, we have to be the ones that are different.
Right.
And then they'll adjust. But it's hard. Like when my family changed, right? And things go differently, I have to accept their shift.
Right.
Right? Like if I don't, then it's going to just put them right back in the same place. So it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge in all our relationships with family, with partners, with friends. Like if every time you see somebody, coworkers, you assume they're different. Because something might have happened from last night to this morning when you saw them last, right? You assume they're different. And you talk to them that way. You go in with that curiosity. Everything will be different. You lose your scripts.
Right. Yeah.
You lose the script.
Right.
And it's a challenge to do that. But like you can remind yourself, like put a little note up on your computer. Lose the script, right? Lose the story.
Right.
And imagine and be curious about who they are in this moment.
That's true. And you've really kind of keyed something in for me. I'm really thinking about how the most joyful people I know are always the one that ask people, how are you today? Or what's going on for you today? You know what I mean? You don't always hear that from people. But really, if you think about the most joyful, really energetically moving forward people, those are the ones that are constantly, every time they meet you, asking you, today, how are you? Or what's happening for you today? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Because they want to, because they're not assuming that you're the same as you were yesterday.
Right. I mean, that's something I just picked up on. Look at you, Lori, teaching people. That's amazing. Yeah,
it's a challenge. You know, what's the biggest challenge is doing that with your partner, someone that you live with every single day.
Yeah.
And you know them, right? You know them inside out, right?
Right.
And imagine doing that with them.
Yeah.
Like, imagine that. You're not like, oh, if I ask him to do this, he'll roll his eyes and he'll say, yeah, fine, but then he won't do it.
Yeah.
You know, we do that, right? We put ourselves into those situations and we have the whole story before it actually happens.
Well, I think that even happens in the formulating of a relationship because I noticed I'm sort of forging possible new relationship, and yesterday I was in a different space than I normally am, and it took me a few seconds to wonder if I should express how I was, because it's like I've always been this particular person, and every now and then Pete steps, into different places. But it was kind of like, am I that authentic person in this relationship? Do you know what I mean? And I need to stop saying, do you know what I mean? Somebody's been pointing out that I say that a lot. So that's something I'm being very conscious of, and I'm sure they're listening right now.
That's funny. So when you say that, when you ask that, do you want people to understand you, or are you doing that so that they resonate with you? What is it
That was the exact question that was asked. That's very interesting. So that is an interesting question to ask. Is it because I don't think I'm being heard, or is it because I want to make sure my point is valid? So I'm thinking it's a combination of the two. But I'm sure as I step more into uh, the understanding of my own space, that I probably will ask it less.
right? So, and it depends on what you're doing, right?
Hmm.
So, if you're actually having like, I used to ask that question a lot when I ran groups,
Hmm.
right? And when I run groups, or when I'm really coaching somebody up, right? I want them to be able to understand. Does it resonate? Does it make sense? It doesn't necessarily mean they agree,
Right.
right?
Right.
What we want to make sure of is that they grasp the concept that we're trying to get across,
Right. Are they even present?
right? So that's, so asking, what does it mean to you?
Hmm.
Which it can be the same thing, right? It's just rewording it so that you make sure that they're understanding how you're getting the point across.
Yeah. Because so many times in conversations, people aren't really listening to what you're saying. They're almost like formulating their next response or their next point that they want to make. And I guess that's really the point, is to make sure that they've even heard what you said, whether or not it
Right.
resonates. Yeah.
Yeah, because someone said, I read, like when I studied coaching, the thing that they said was the most difficult was learning how to listen, just
Hmm.
to, and not listen to respond.
Right. Right. That's so true. Do you think that's from a space of not thinking that you're going to be smart enough to respond, well, I almost said, do you know what I mean? Again, that's interesting. I just caught myself. That's funny. I guess what I'm saying is it's almost like you want to be like this smart person, so you think you have to have this extra brain power to really figure out what to say next.
Yes, I think it's different for each person. Like I think some people, me included, sometimes I just like to hear myself talk. I think I'm so smart. I can get the point across better than somebody else.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes I don't really care what they're saying.
Hmm.
Like, let's be honest. Sometimes somebody's talking, I'm like, yeah, I could care less what they're talking about. This is
Right.
boring. I want to get in. I want to say something. I want to
Right.
move on. Right?
Yeah, because some people make the same point like 3 or 4 times. You're like, okay, I heard you the first time.
And
Well,
so asking someone like when you're talking to them, do you get it? Does that make sense to you? Doesn't always mean we need confirmation or approval. It
hmm.
just means, are you getting what I'm saying?
Right.
But that's, in communication world, it's a very ineffective way to ask,
Hmm.
because they can just say yes and they might have no idea,
Might be
right?
being polite or something.
Or they have a completely different concept of what you're saying and it's not
Ah.
anything like what you meant,
Ah.
right? I was on the phone the other day with a mortgage company, and there was a dispute, and I was trying to explain the situation, and I clearly was doing a horrible job explaining because she wasn't getting it.
Hmm.
So here's the difference. Instead of being like, she's an idiot, my thing was, how can I explain this differently
Hmm.
so that she can understand what I'm trying to say?
Right.
Right?
Hmm.
Now, in doing that, I'm not frustrated with her.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out, how do I speak and explain. Now, it was a simple thing. And I knew I wasn't explaining it because she kept saying the same thing. Oh,
Hmm.
and I did it like 3 times. I repeated the same story 3 times. And 3 times she came back with the same not response that was not what I needed.
Do you think it was her language, or do you think it was the her
No, it was
automatic
mine.
response?
It
I
was
mean,
my
but
language.
you think is like, yeah, trying to find out what her language is.
Yeah, like I said, wait a minute. I said, I'm not explaining this. So I said, I'm not explaining it right. It's not you. Because she kept apologizing for not getting it.
Oh,
And I
okay.
said, nope, I'm not explaining it right. So I said, I'm going to back up and I'm going to give me a second to rethink it.
Hmm.
And so that I can explain it how I'm seeing it. And then when I did, she was like, oh, I get what you're saying,
Hmm.
and resolved the issue. But it was just like this. I could not explain it. Like in my head, it made perfect sense because I knew what I meant,
Yes.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
how often do we do that? I know exactly what I'm getting to, but the person on the other side is like, I have no idea what this person's thinking.
Right. Right.
So how often do we do that?
Hmm.
We've formulated the whole thing in our head. It makes complete sense to us.
Right.
And then we sort of halfway tell the other person thinking they know what we've formulated in our head.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the conversations with family.
Right.
Well, we formulated it in our head, but they weren't part of that conversation.
Yeah. How much of conversation do you think is actually, this might be a little kind of a meta question, but I've noticed a lot of times if I do have that conversation in my head first, I don't have to have as much of the conversation in actuality. How much do you think is energetically sent maybe beforehand or do you, well, I almost said, do you know what I mean again? Yeah, I'm being really mindful of this today. That's so funny. I'm having such a good time with this. But did I make sense in that?
Yes, you did. So what you're saying is, how much of the conversation in your head do you think the other person knows before you have it?
Possibly, yes. That's part of the
Yeah,
question. Absolutely, yes.
yeah. So I would say none.
Ah, I love this. I'm having the best time.
Okay. And our problem is we think they do.
Ah,
And that's
gotcha.
why our communication is so awful, right? It's like that's like when you say, "What? I didn't tell you." Like it's like, "No, you never mentioned." I'm like, "Geez, I did in my head." How many times? Like I can't tell you how many times I've said that to my husband, and vice versa.
Hmm.
Like I'm like, he's like, "You didn't mention that you were going to lunch with so and so today." I'm like, "I didn't." I'm like, "Geez, well, I have in my head on multiple conversations with you,
Wow. That's
right?"
fun. Right?
So that's the problem with our communication is we do have multiple conversations in our head with people, and
Hmm.
then we're irate that they don't remember them.
Hmm.
Like, how can you not know? I told you, and it's like, oh yeah, that must have been in my dream.
Hmm. So how? Because I had a conversation sort of like this with somebody the other day, and the conversation really turned around to where sometimes speaking to somebody can be a little ineffective because it's really almost like an ego speaking to an ego. So how can you get past that?
You drop into your body and you feel it.
Hmm.
You
Okay.
give yourself permission to feel, right? Um, it's that whole you listen to listen, not listen to respond.
Ah. Uh huh.
And when you do that, then when you do have the conversation, you're out of your head.
Hmm.
You're not thinking what's the best way for me to say it. You're going, this is what I'm feeling, so this is what I can tell you,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Um, because there's so much assumptions made in conversations. I actually was just talking to a client about this today. She's taking care of a very sick father, and her boyfriend doesn't seem to understand how stressful it is and just how much energy it takes for her to do this, right? Because they live together and it's just exhausting. And he's feeling rejected and left out, the boyfriend. So you hear all those noises?
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's people. I'm gonna turn. I'm gonna keep.
Oh, okay. I thought it was me. I thought I was hearing things with this conversation. So, so what happened is she said he doesn't understand how stressed I am about it. And I asked, oh, I'm like, well, have you told him? And she said, well, I told him that it was taking a lot out of me. And I said, that's not really telling him anything. So we make these assumptions that someone's going to understand. And the truth is, if you really tell somebody your true feelings, like, I'm exhausted, this is so stressful taking care of my dad. I feel so, I feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders, and I'm responsible for everything because he's got dementia and he can't be left alone, and it's terrifying. And so when you ask me to do something, I go right into overwhelm, right? So I'm explaining this to her, and she was like, that's scary to tell somebody that, right? Because now you're opening up and you're not in your head. You're telling them, like, when you ask me to do one more thing, I'm not even sure I can handle it because everything is on me right now. That's how I'm feeling. But if you don't tell that person, then they just feel rejected because you're just constantly going, no, I don't want to do, I can't do that. No, I can't do that. No, I can't do that. But if you tell them what you really feel and what's really happening in your world, all of a sudden there's not any rejection. Now this person actually knows what's happening with you.
Right. If you don't give people even the chance to even know where you're at, how can you really expect an honest, fulfilled answer really from them? Yeah,
Right.
that was beautifully. That was a beautiful answer to really what I asked. It was really such a fulfillment of it, and let me really feel the full flavor. And it's like making me really think about how I really move into my day.
It, it's and it's I call it emotional transparency, and it's really telling someone what's really going on, not just the fluff, not just, yeah, everything's going to be great, I'm fine, or it's all good, I'm a little bit stressed, but that's okay.
Is that like a muscle that we can kind of exercise? Because most of us, especially in the South, we're really taught to, really kind of dampen our responses to people and to. It's supposed to be the kinder way, but I don't think it really generally is the kinder way.
Right. Um, it's practice, and I'd say start with small things because it's very scary to do. It makes you vulnerable, and most of us don't want that vulnerability. We say we do, but then when it comes right down to it, we're terrified of it because putting your feelings out there to the world, really your real feelings, not the, yeah, everything's pretty good. Well, it's a little stressful, but I can handle it. Not that, but the real, like, oh my God, I'm terrified. Like, I'm terrified every day, right? Like, and I'm speaking for my client. I'm so scared that, like, I'm going to do something wrong and something's bad's going to happen to him, right? So if you can tell somebody that's really opening up, right? And opening your heart and telling someone what your real fear is. And we're afraid that they'll reject us when we're that open. It's easy for people to reject us if they don't really know the real truth because they're not really rejecting us. We have our little mask on and we're just not being rejected.
So now, is that vulnerability? Is that something that can come after you learn how to really create your boundaries? Because you don't want to be that vulnerable, really, with everyone and in every space. Is that true?
Right. Well, you can decide that.
Uh-oh.
Right. So you can still have boundaries and be vulnerable. Our problem is we think it's an either or.
Oh, okay. We get into chapter 2 here.
Right? Because we think it's an and. Yeah, we think it's a either or, but it's an and. You can have boundaries and be vulnerable.
Okay, so how do we get this perfect soup? Now I'm in this.
Well, it takes some work. It takes practice. So the whole time that you're practicing your boundaries, you can still tell people things. Now you might find out that some people you can't share everything with, right? But that doesn't mean you can't be honest with what you can share. That's the real challenge, right? Like, I'm not going to go tell, like, I do some teaching, right? Well, assistant teaching, and I'm not going to go tell the students things that I would tell a teacher that I work with, right? Like I'm not going to tell a colleague. I'm going to tell my colleagues different things that I'm going to tell students.
I gotcha.
Even though the students are adults,
Mm.
it's still a different relationship.
I getcha.
So
Okay.
so there's a different boundary, but it doesn't mean I'm not telling them other things. I might soften it. I might explain it differently, right? Because they're not there to work through my issues, right? So I teach in a self-growth school. So as a teaching assistant, I'm there to serve the students. They're not there to serve me.
Mm.
So if I'm stuck with something, I'm going to talk to the other teachers and the other teaching assistants about it. Never a student, right? So that's a boundary. But that doesn't mean that I can't share with them different issues and teach them how I got through it.
Mm.
Right? So you still have them, they're just different. Because boundaries are going to be flexible. That's a healthy boundary. Is always. You're never going to have a rigid boundary. You don't want a rigid boundary. You want them to be flexible. This is what I'm going to do with these people. This is what I'm going to do with this person.
That's interesting because it really brings into mind about how sometimes you'll meet somebody in a professional or whatever relationship, and then perhaps it becomes in some way a more personal relationship, and how you really see that person in a different light, don't you? Because they've really kind of lowered a boundary that they had with you in a certain space.
Right. Yeah, you right, because it's always, when you first start working, like wherever you work, it's always like so buttoned up and professional, and then the longer you, right, like look at, I'm sitting up like, gotta be like this. I'm not really good at that, so I don't tend to be that way, but I know a ton of people who are completely different outside of the office than they are at work. And I could never do that. I could never fake it like that. I'm like too, like you know me, right? Like I can't fake it. Like this is what I am. I can't pretend. But I find it intriguing that people can put on a mask like that and be that way. And it's a benefit for them on some levels, but then on the other hand, for me, I have a really tough time trusting people like that because I have no idea who they really are.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, how do you think they're doing? Are they partitioning part of themselves? Are they still being authentic, or is that just their way of creating boundaries?
I think it's their way of creating boundaries. It's what they're safe doing, but I like often feel like I don't know who they really are. Like, are they really like the person at the office? Are they like the person when we go out for a drink? Like, are they like, what are they like with their family? Like, there's no continuity of who they really are to me. Like it's too big of a gap. Like I can't seem to, when they get frustrated at work, what are they like? Like some of them aren't like that, So I just remember from years ago, like watching people and being like, I have no idea if they're trustworthy. Like when I see them out, they're like so different.
Right.
That what is real? Right?
Yeah.
So for me, and it doesn't mean that they're not somewhere in the middle, and it doesn't mean that they're not trustworthy. It's just my issue with it, right? Like for me, I have a really tough time because I don't know what they really are like. I don't know what their real behavior is.
Right.
So I struggle with that.
I want to make sure everybody knows this is a live show right now. If you can actually join the show in a couple of different ways. You can join the stream at zcedonline.com. Go to the Lori Grant Feel to Heal show, which should be the very top one on the courses. You can also dial in at 408-638-0968, and the meeting ID is 887-610-403. All that information can still be found at the True to You Radio Facebook page or at zcedonline.com, or at truetoyouradio.com. There's a number of different ways for you to check. I just want to make sure everybody knows that they can call in and they can ask some questions if they want to talk directly to you. I'd like to kind of go back to the holiday season and how we can really help people to really deal, because it's so funny. You see these everywhere. It's like happy holidays, and it's the most wonderful time of the year, and yet you hear about so many people really having there's probably more alcohol sold at this time of the year, and there's more diversions that we have, foods that we really shouldn't eat, and things that I think we're really doing just to kind of cope with having to be around people that we've avoided all year long.
For some people, yeah.
So can we give some people some coping mechanisms and things that they can really do to, I don't know, what would it be more about creating boundaries or being authentic, or what would it be?
I think like a little bit of everything. I love how you always ask which.
I'm a very either or, aren't I?
Yeah, it's intriguing. And it is difficult. Like this time of year is, a lot of people are in overwhelm, right? They say yes, and that's another thing altogether, right? But they say yes to a million things when they really don't have the time or the energy to do that, right? Because they're trying to cram in shopping, and then somebody says, let's do this. And all of a sudden, like 5 nights out of 7, you've got plans, and you're still like, I haven't done any of the holiday shopping yet. Oh my gosh, my family's coming to town. What am I, and so you get all stressed out. Some of that is practicing how to say no, right? There's just a little, like turn people down. It's okay. They'll survive. As will you. They're not going to be offended. It's not your problem if they are. And that's a little thing, but it's huge. And it's really not that little. For those people who have a tough time saying no, it's monumental to get a no out. So one of the first things you can do to like relieve some of the stress of the holidays is say no to the things you really don't want to do. And you know what they are. As soon as you say yes to them and you feel that awful feeling in the pit of your stomach,
right?
You know that you just said yes to something you didn't really want to do, right?
Yeah.
So I usually recommend, instead of saying yes automatically, to say, let me check my schedule. And I'll get back to you within 24 hours. And make sure you get back to them. Don't do the passive aggressive thing. Just ignore them after you say that. Like, actually get back to them and give yourself a chance to think about, is that something I really want to do? Now, a lot of it you probably will want to do. But some of it, sorry about that. Some of it you might not want to. And that's one of the things you say no to. Because when you say yes to things you don't want to do, you end up resenting the person that you said yes to.
Right.
It's not their fault. They have a right to ask you. You have a right to say no. You don't get to get mad at the person because you didn't have the courage to say, no, I can't do that. Right? But we get mad at them.
Right.
We actually get mad at the person for having the audacity to ask us a question, to ask us to do something, instead of just saying, I can't do it.
Which, if we had not been asked, later on we would probably be like, I can't believe they didn't even ask me.
Right. So we have to be able to say no. That's one thing. And the other is what we were talking about earlier, the letting go of how we think the person's going to respond when we see them for the holiday events. So if you had a tiff with your mother or your father or one of your siblings, or even one of your kids, or one of your nieces and nephews, it doesn't mean you have to carry it forward to this trip, this visit. You can just let it go, and you can make a conscious choice that I love this person and I want to have a good time. Right? It doesn't mean you like the person.
Uh-oh.
Right? We have familial love. This is what we do. We love our family. It's sort of ingrained in us. It doesn't mean we like all of them. Right? And it's really hard to own that.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not recommending that you tell somebody in your family that you don't like them, but we all know who those people are in our lives, right? We
Mm-hmm.
all have a cousin or a family member that a sibling that we're not really close to them. We love them because they're our brother or our sister, but we would never be friends with them outside of the family. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
not somebody we would ever hang out with.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't mean we dislike them. It's just we don't really like them.
Right.
They're our brother, they're our uncle, they're our sister, and they're all right, but that's about it. So stop trying to pretend you have to have a different relationship with them than you have.
Mm.
Love them because they're your sibling. Be civil. And don't try and make it a relationship that isn't what it is.
Mm.
Half our battles are because the people in our lives aren't who we want them to be.
Mm.
And it's a big reminder on the holidays, right? For kids, for people who grew up and their parents didn't give them what they wanted, and then they see them at Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever holiday it is, and you're like, oh, there they are. They got me another crappy gift. They don't pay any attention to anything about what I really want, right? And you might as well be 5 saying that.
Right.
So what if you just said, this is what they're capable of?
Hmm.
They cared enough to get me something. And the fact that they don't pay attention to me, that's who they are.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And, I had a grandparent, God bless, right? Every year they came back from Florida from the winter, right? And they brought me a doll every year. And I would cry when they left. And I would cry to my mother and my father. They don't know me at all. I hate dolls. Why do they bring me a doll every time? Right? That was my story, right? Every year they brought me a doll. Well, every year, I swear, it was a bigger and uglier doll than the year before. Now, I'm pretty sure I never told my grandmother I didn't like dolls.
Mm-hmm.
So how would she know?
Right.
I was her granddaughter. I was her oldest granddaughter. She had 3 grandsons first. I was the first granddaughter. Of course she was going to bring me dolls.
Mm-hmm.
How would she know that I played with Tonka trucks?
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we do, right? We hold on to things. And I held on to it, by the way. I held on to it while I was in my teen years. And I would always be like, my grandmother has no idea who I am. But honestly, I never tried to let her know who I was. Because I had this whole story that she didn't know me.
Right.
And that was a convenient story for me to be a bit self-righteous and right? And so that's what happens with us. We're afraid to let the story go. Because then what happens in the relationship?
Right. Who are we in that relationship if we let that story go?
Right.
And how much more vulnerable do we become?
Right. If we actually talk to them about what we're feeling. So we have to give ourselves that opportunity. So that's how you handle the holidays. You remember that it's your story. And it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Okay? Every year my grandmother did bring me a doll. Every year I was disappointed. Okay? It's how much power do I want to continue to give that story? Because by the time I was 8 or 9, she stopped bringing me dolls and gave me other stuff. Of course, I don't remember what they were, probably because I liked them then, right? I liked what she got me after that.
Yeah.
But for those handful of years that I remember, it was devastating for me because she gave me something I didn't want. Right? But once I started getting what I wanted, it's amazing how I let it go. Right? Like I don't remember the stuff I got. So this is what we do because it doesn't buy into our story. So I don't remember what she brought me from the time I was 9 to 15. I only remember from like 4 to 8 when I got what I didn't want. So the story becomes more powerful instead of less. Like, oh, she started to get me what I wanted, and now it's not a story anymore, but I still hold on to those 4 years where it was.
Right.
And you get so can you see how that,
Mm-hmm.
and so we do that with everyone. So we want to, the goal is to let go of the power of the story, to go, oh yeah, that did happen. And how long am I going to resent my grandmother for it before I realize I'm wasting so much of my energy? Because my grandmother loved me.
Right.
She just picked up crappy gifts.
So I just logged into the Zoom thing.
Oh, hang on.
Just
Hang on.
for the fun of it.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, we had little technical difficulties there for half a second. Sorry about that.
So it's just being aware of things like that. Like we hold on to the story, and then when we see the person, that energy's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so we have this resentment energy, and we know that energy is palpable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can walk into a room where somebody's had a fight, and the fight might be over, but you can feel it, right?
Right.
You can feel the discomfort, the ickiness.
Mm-hmm.
So when that happens, right, we do the same thing. When we're carrying that resentment energy, and when we see the people in our lives, they feel it.
Mm.
So earlier when you were saying, can people know things, if we relive it in our heads, they might not know the exact situation, but what they know is they get a feeling that something's off. They get a feeling that you might be mad at them.
Mm-hmm.
They get a feeling they might be loving them, right? Like if you had a great experience with that person and you can't wait to see them again, when you see them, right, they're like, oh, they're all happy and bubbly and everything's awesome. This is great. They can feel that the same way as if you had a not so good experience and then you see them and you're like, even though you're fine, there might be this little piece that's like, oh, I don't trust them. What's going to happen?
Right.
So some of that is just being aware, being conscious of it, and seeing if you can shift that so that when you do get together with them, it's a more open, honest, like what we talked about earlier. Be curious. What have you been up to? Oh my gosh. What's your job like? Now, I have a sibling that I ask him, and he's like, oh, it's a job. Right? I still ask him every time because I'm waiting for a different answer. I'm waiting for a different answer, right? Like instead of saying he's going to say it this way, I'm just like, one day he's going to say, oh, this really cool thing happened. Right? That's what I'm waiting for. Instead of, oh, he's going to answer the same way every time.
Right.
One day he's going to answer it differently.
Yeah. That's so, and you won't be knocked out of your story by his story changing. You're ready for his story to change.
Yeah, and I'm okay if it doesn't. Right? Like it's not like, oh God, could you say something nice about your job? Right? Like that's his story. It's his belief system that's got him locked into that. Like I know someone, he has this job that's perfect for him, right? It's outdoors, he works with plants, he loves all that stuff. And when you talk to him, you think he had like an indoor job that he hated like worse than death. And his story is that work isn't supposed to be good.
Mm-hmm.
It's not supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be enjoyable. So even though he has a job that fits right into everything he loves to do, he can't just say it's a good job. He's always got to complain. And that comes from a belief system, I'm sure, from his childhood. Like, work is hard. You got to work you got to work. You don't have any choice. Jobs are tough. Right? So we learn all that. And then even though we love it, we can't just own that we love it.
Right.
So we do that with family, all the relationships. So around the holidays. So practice saying no. Learn how to be curious about what they're doing today. And don't be resentful if what they say what they've always said. Just be like, oh, okay. Because how often do you say what you've always said?
Right. Yeah.
you know?
Hmm.
We get very mad at people because they mirror us.
Yeah. They expose part of us we don't want to see, don't they?
Yes,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And the more we're triggered by someone, the more you know damn well it's an issue you have.
Right. Right. That is so true.
Damn it!
I know. I still got to work on that.
So when you're triggered, right? So I get triggered by a ton of things. So it's just being aware of it. Like like around the holidays, especially, right? We're going to be triggered because everything is so raw around the holidays because we're more tired, we're running around more. And for some people, it's really fun,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for some people, it stinks, right? Like if money is tight. So if you come from a family where some of the people have money and some don't, and they're all excited about the holidays because they can go spend and bring you gifts and do all these things, and you're like, crap, I can't afford to get them anything all that nice. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to go into more debt, whatever it is. Like, I just don't have the money. Oh my gosh. So you have all these stresses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're resentful, right? Like, oh, I can't do that. I don't want to, I can't have all that. And then they're like, oh, it's okay. It doesn't matter, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't.
Right.
It only matters to the people who are stressed about it, right?
Right.
Like, I know in my family, I don't care if my siblings don't get me something super nice. My goal is to be all together,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that doesn't relieve their stress. And it doesn't relieve mine, right? Because we have all different levels. I'm not the wealthiest person in my family. So the people that are wealthier than me, I'm like, oh God, I'm not getting them good enough here. Right? And then I
Mm-hmm.
know that I have other brothers that are like, oh, I'm not getting them something good. Right? And then I'm like, well, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
So if it doesn't matter to me, I make the same assumption that my other brother, it doesn't matter to them. That I don't go all like I can't afford to get what they would get.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to remember that. And remember that, are we there for the gifts or are we there for the people?
Right. What is the
Right?
ultimate goal? And that's a boundary, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's what, how much do you let your story affect a holiday and the joy that you could have with people because you're so caught up in the story, the old story,
Mm.
and given it its power. So I mean, I used to tell people all the time, I was a weight loss coach in another life, right? And I said, if you go to a party and the most important part of the party is the food that's there and not the people, leave the party.
Oh,
Like the most important thing shouldn't be the food,
right.
right? It should be the people that you're spending time with.
Right.
If you're at an event and the best thing about that event is the food, there's a problem. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same with family.
Mm.
And just for the record, if your family is awful, you don't have to spend holidays with them.
Oh, I'm so refreshed you said that.
You don't have to put yourself into toxic situations just because, you know,
Right.
it's family. I,
Right.
I do with quotes for those that are listening in and not watching. Um, if somebody's really toxic, if you came from abuse, if it's just bad, then for the love of God, don't go spend time with them.
Hmm.
You just because they birthed you doesn't mean you have to be with them.
It's not servitude, is it?
It is not. It's not. And and I think people feel, there's this overwhelming guilt that comes with that. But sometimes it's just okay to say I can't spend the holiday. You might be able to call them and say Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, but you might not be able to spend that time with them. And a lot of that is paying attention to you, right? Um, what's what condition am I in? what place am I in emotionally? Am I in a really good place that I can really have healthy boundaries around them and be fine? Or am I feeling a little under the weather, a little weak, a little just emotionally drained, and any time with them is just going to wipe me out completely, right? So assess what's true for you, because there are different times when you can be around certain people and it's fine, and there are other times when they just suck the life right out of you and you can't deal with it. So just pay attention to that. That's another thing that you can do for the holidays. Like if you have certain people that really just wear on you, don't plan to spend 5 days with them. Like if you can handle your parents for 4 hours, then you go spend 4 hours with them. You don't go, well, we're gonna stay for the weekend, woo! And then after like 6 hours, you're like, I could kill everyone in this house. Right?
Right.
So you think I don't like my family, right? I actually love them. But it's just being very aware of how much you can handle. I have clients, they're like, I can spend like no more than 4 hours with my mother. And then she's nasty, she gets nasty. And I said, well, then why would you ever schedule anything more than 4 hours with her?
Right.
She was like, what?
Yeah, like that's even a possibility.
If you know, like, if the hour, it's always a battle. Why wouldn't you just say, we're going to just spend the afternoon and leave?
Right.
And she was like, oh, I never thought of that. I go, yeah, because then you could actually have a really good time.
Right.
And then it's over. And then you could maybe see her a week later and you're not like so mad at her because you had a big blow up on Christmas Day because you spent 12 hours together.
Right. Right. Yeah.
She's like, oh.
Yeah, because I was going to bring up another topic, and you really have already brought up, is about traditions. You know what I mean? And how we're so roped into those, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such crap. It's again, we're stuck in the story. You get to make new traditions whenever you want. You know, we make new traditions, right? Like I say that my husband and I have made new traditions with our families, right? We do differently than we used to for all different holidays. So, you know, I was raised Jewish and we celebrate Passover. And when I was a kid, it was it was a pretty serious thing, and it was a long drawn out thing, and it went for hours and hours. And now we only do half of the service at the house. We do and then that's it. That's our new tradition. So, but we changed it because that's what suited us as a family.
Right.
So you do the same thing with Easter, with New Year's. You change the traditions to suit your best life. Right. Not, I'm going to keep doing those old traditions even though I'm miserable doing them.
Yeah.
Because I mean, when you hear it out loud, that's the absurdity, right?
Yeah, because I know from.
I'm gonna have Thanksgiving and have everyone over and I'm doing everything, and I'm gonna be miserable, but I'm doing it anyway.
I know for me, before when I would really do these traditional things, it was almost like I was trying to recreate a holiday that never occurred. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Like yes, this fantasy holiday.
Yes.
Like if I do all this, everything will be perfect. My family will all get along. I'll get the gifts I actually wanted. They'll all be loving and nice to me the way I really wanted them to be. And then you go crazy and you're so wrapped up in it that you're the one that's the lunatic instead of everybody else. Right? Like decorations aren't up right. You're right. Like you're screaming and yelling because you don't have everything trimmed the way you want it to be trimmed.
Right.
And then you realize, oh my God, I'm the crazy person now instead of them. Like I'm the one that's so stressed because the house doesn't look traditional.
Right. Yeah, and you see a lot of people like that where they just get so roped into it.
Yeah. And it's fine if it doesn't stress you out and create all this habit. But if it's creating all this habit, then it's time to make a shift. It's time to say maybe this isn't the best way to go about doing it.
Right.
like I didn't celebrate Christmas growing up, and when I got married, when I moved in with my husband, and after we got married, he wanted a Christmas tree, right? And I was like, okay, well, okay, I've never had one, but I'll go for it. And we went and got a real tree, and so it was fun. I had never done it, so it was all like new for me. And we set it up in the house, and he's like, all right, well, you got to put the lights on it. And I remember laughing. I was like, I don't know how to put lights on a Christmas tree. I'm like, I'm Jewish. What are you talking about? I don't celebrate Christmas. And he's like, well, my mom always did the lights. I don't know how to do them.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Well, at least like watch somebody do it. I'm like, we didn't have a Christmas tree. But he was so ingrained that it was somebody else's job to do the lights, and he would come afterwards and we would hang the ornaments, but somebody else had to do the lights.
Right.
So I did the lights. I can't tell you how ugly that Christmas tree was. I didn't know how to do lights. So now we have a pre-lit tree.
Yeah.
Because after a few years, I was like, this is so stupid. The tree always looks awful. But you know, his tradition was somebody else does the light.
Right.
And it didn't matter that I had no clue how to do the light. It was our little running joke for a long time. I'm like, there's the Jewish kid trying to wrap the Christmas tree. I'm like, that's pretty much what it looked like. It looked like I just wrapped the tree. There was no.
Oh yeah. See, I've had to make a boundary of that because I used to be really crazy about how the lights went on a tree. But yes, so you're speaking straight to me.
Yeah. So it was like our funny little thing, right? So the tree was always pretty horrible, but we shifted that tradition, right? We got a pre-lit tree because I was like, it's absurd. Mm-hmm. So it's just giving ourselves permission to let go and create new traditions. Keep some of the stuff that you like, but let go of the stuff that's not effective for you.
No longer serves you. I like that.
Because when it serves you, it's great, but when it stresses you, it's time to let go. Right.
Well, we've got about a minute and a half. Why don't you tell everybody how they can reach you and what you do and all that kind of good stuff?
So you can reach me at Lori, Lori, at LoriGrant.com. And I specialize in boundaries and how to say no, and really, owning your space, empowering you, letting go of the guilt. It's not just saying no, it's relieving the guilt that comes with it. So that's really my big specialty. And the boundaries that go with that. I'm sure, as you figured out from this radio show, I'm very much around boundaries and for ourselves. Other people will fall into line as we take care of ourselves. It's a very funny thing. And for most of us who have problems saying no, we are also fixers. We won't ask for help. We'll always want to help everybody else. And it's our job to take care of us first. It doesn't mean that we won't serve other people, but we have to take care of us first. So that's what I specialize in. So they can find me on Facebook at Leg Up Healing on Facebook, and Energy Coach Lori at on Twitter, and LoriGrant.com.
Okay, excellent. All righty, and we sure appreciate you being here on our new live video streaming service here on 2D Radio with the CC. Sorry, live web events. All of a sudden something was in my throat. We appreciate you being live here with us, and this has been a lot of fun, and we're going to say goodnight, okay?
Okay, have a great